Hey there, I'm Gadi Schwartz coming to you from Los Angeles, where the chances for a new trial for the Menendez brothers might have just gone down in flames. The new LA DA is saying that they should not get a third shot at a jury after all these years, while the brothers also make their case.
Who I've evolved into, who I've seen Lyle evolve into, I'm beginning to like myself.
And in New York, another high-profile case, Luigi Mangione was in court for the first time since being charged with murder. We're going to tell you what that was about. And AI will help one piece of art go down in history, all starting with some American cheese. We're going to explain that. Those are just some of the stories we are following tonight. There is so much more to unpack, so let's get going, because this is Stay Tuned Now. Hello. Tonight in L.A., there is a murder case that has gripped this city and so much of our country for decades now. And a lot of people here thought we were right on the verge of seeing the Menendez brothers walk free out of prison, or at least get a new trial after a whole lot of hype by the former district attorney. But today, that possibility seems to be fading. The new district attorney coming out and pretty forcefully saying he has looked at the case and he thinks all the recent focus over whether the brothers were molested by their father before they killed him is off base, and he doesn't think that the brothers deserve another trial.
The defense has now argued the following. They've said to resolve this case, jurors had to decide a single critical question. Was Jose Menendez molesting his sons? The problem with saying that that is the critical question in the Menendez trial is that it's wrong. The jury never, in any of the two juries, had to resolve the question of whether the Menendez brothers were sexually molested. Sexual abuse is abhorrent, and we will prosecute sexual abuse in any form it comes. But sexual abuse in this situation, while it may have been a motivation for Eric and Lyle to do what they did, does not constitute self-defense.
NBC's Liz Kreutz joins us now to talk more about today's developments. So, Liz, I mean, this seems so much like a 180 from where we were a couple of months ago, right?
Hey, Gadi. I mean, in some ways it does seem that way, really, because we have a brand new district attorney and a district attorney who now seems to have a very different view of this case than our previous district attorney. The previous DA, George Gascon, came out last week that he believes that they were sexually abused as boys and that could have led to this crime, and also said that he believed that times have changed now 30-something years later, and that if this crime and a jury was seeing this crime today, it could have had a different outcome than it did at the time in the 90s. This district attorney, though, doesn't view it that way. In fact, today he continually was quoting the brothers' attorneys from the time, Leslie Abramson, who famously said just because they were sexually abused doesn't justify murdering their parents. So he doesn't really seem to be viewing the sexual abuse in the same way as the previous DA. But that said, it's important to point out that this DA here today did oppose the habeas petition, which was basically a request to get a new trial. He dismissed some of that evidence and denied and opposed that request. But he has not yet made his recommendation on the resentencing path, which is a different path. He expects to make that decision in the coming weeks.
And when we're talking about some of that evidence, I mean, behind so much of the recent push for release, besides that Netflix show, was the discovery of this old letter, right? How does the DA, the new DA, see that letter? And is it just disappear from this case now?
Yeah, I mean, some of this evidence, he said, will be used as he weighs whether to recommend resentencing or not. But the resentencing recommendation isn't just about this new evidence, which includes this letter. It also is about how they've been rehabilitated. When it comes to this letter, this was a letter that Eric and Lyle say, or that they allege, was sent from Eric to their cousin in 1988, maybe 6 months before the murders, where Eric apparently wrote to the cousin saying how worried he is and scared. He stays up late at night, worried that his father, Jose Menendez, was going to come into his home, and it was about the sexual abuse. The DA today discredited it in the sense that he said that he hasn't been able to actually obtain the physical copy, that it was a photocopy of the letter, and that he really hasn't been able to verify that it was legitimately sent by Eric at the time, and he questioned why it wasn't brought up at the time of the trial when both Eric testified about sexual abuse and the cousin at the time testified about it during the trial.
And speaking of the cousins and the rest of the family, what is the Menendez family saying about this?
Yeah, so they are not happy. The majority of the Menendez family members want them released, support the brothers, and want them resentenced and get out of prison. They put a scathing statement out tonight. I'll read some of it. They basically said District Attorney Nathan Hochman took us right back to 1996 today. He opened the wounds we have spent decades trying to heal. He didn't listen to us. We are profoundly disappointed by his remarks. The justice system failed Eric and Lyle then, and it continues to fail them now. But in this statement, they also went on to say that they are grateful that at the end of the day, there is still this resentencing path, and that even if the DA here does not ultimately recommend they should be resentenced, it's not up to him. It is up to a judge. A judge will make the final decision. That hearing is next month, where they will hear arguments from people for and against their release. Gadi.
Liz Kreutz out there at the courthouse. Liz, thank you. And let's bring in legal analyst Dina Dahl to talk a little bit more about the Menendez brothers and the case here. Dina, thanks so much for being with us. I mean, does it seem like all the momentum has suddenly disappeared from this, or is this still a 50-50 up to a judge?
I mean, it's a much harder battle now for the Menendez brothers. He is taking, this new DA is taking 180 different than the other DA, which is, difficult, obviously, it sounds like, for the family and for him. The fact that he's planning on opposing the habeas petition means that it will most likely fail. It's always very hard to win those anyway. They're post-conviction, constitutional issues. And then now whether or not he's going to be resentenced is going to still be an open question, which he didn't quite address today.
Yeah, in terms of the rehabilitation, I mean, what kind of case, what are we going to see from the Menendez brothers?
So the defense is going to argue, because they have been great examples of rehabilitation, then they should qualify for resentencing, which doesn't mean that they are getting off. And we're no longer in that realm, let's say. It's talking about bringing their sentence maybe more to a manslaughter charge, which would give them a release now since they were young when this happened. And so they're going to bring up that example of them leading sex abuse survivors clinics, evidently in the prison. All those things are going to, be something that they bring forward to the judge.
And Dina, I know you're here in LA. Like, I can't count how many times we here have heard this is not political, this is not political. We heard it all throughout the end of the political season last time. And yet, seeing this today, is this all still political, or is this really about addressing changes in how society sees things like molestation?
I think it's really too bad that we have such different points of view from the district attorneys. It's not good for our justice system. We really want prosecutors to look at the same set of facts of the law and have a very similar outcome. We rely on that. We rely on people coming through the justice system getting a fairly typical response from the prosecutors. We don't want to see, depending on who the prosecutor is, you're going to get a completely different outcome. It makes people think prosecutions are political. So that's not great, honestly, for the interpretation of the justice system in LA, that they are so different. The two DAs were so different and looking at the same case.
That makes so much sense. It's like our judicial compass all of a sudden went from west to east. Oh, okay.
Right.
Fascinating stuff. Thank you so much for being with us, Dina.
Thanks for having me.
Sure. Meanwhile, over in New York, Luigi Mangione, the man accused of murdering UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson, was back in court today for the first time since his arraignment. And that case has become somewhat of a public spectacle as well, drawing crowds to the courthouse, with some people lining up as early as 4 a.m. But inside, it was pretty quick, pretty routine pre-trial hearing. As for the defense, right now his lawyers are already arguing his right to a fair trial is being violated, claiming in part that they have found out about evidence that they don't have yet through TV documentaries.
I see the chief of detectives and the New York City mayor, full hair and makeup done, sitting down and giving an interview for television and talking about the evidence in Luigi's case, talking about police paperwork that we don't have, talking about forensics that we have not yet received. I guess we have now today, hearing an actor play Luigi reading from a journal that they say is Luigi's, and we have yet to receive it from the prosecution.
Mangione is facing federal charges along with state charges in both Pennsylvania and New York for Thompson's killing. A high-profile murder case has drawn so much attention in this extremely online age. NBC's Stephanie Gosk has the latest.
Luigi Mangione shackled and silent, making his way into New York State Court today. The defense asking he be uncuffed for the brief procedural hearing, but the judge declined the request.
He's being treated differently because he's being held in federal custody than any other person who would be facing serious murder one charges in New York State Court.
In December, Mangione pleaded not guilty to murdering father of two Brian Thompson, the CEO of UnitedHealthcare. He also faces federal murder charges. One count could carry the death penalty.
We, the people, want Luigi free.
Today, demonstrators gathered outside the courthouse to support the accused killer. Others to protest the healthcare system.
This is going to be a murder trial. Is that the right venue to make a larger point about healthcare?
You know, I'm very reasonable, but I think the American people have been pushed really, really far.
The brazen murder in Midtown Manhattan left New York City stunned.
This was a senseless act of violence. It was a cold and calculated crime.
After a 5-day manhunt, Mangione was arrested in a Pennsylvania McDonald's. Prosecutors say he was found with a ghost gun that matched bullet casings found at the crime scene, along with writings critical of the health insurance industry. Public frustration with the healthcare system, in some cases, turning to support for Mangione. A defense fund has raised more than $500,000. In a statement posted by his defense team, Mangione writes, "I am overwhelmed by and grateful for everyone who has written me to share their stories and express their support."
Mangione is facing 3 cases, 1 in Pennsylvania and 2 here in New York on state and federal charges. The legal process could take years. It's only just beginning.
Stephanie Goss, thank you. And over at the FBI, there is a new director, Kash Patel, sworn in this afternoon. Take a listen.
There will be accountability within the FBI and outside of the FBI. And we will do it through rigorous constitutional oversight starting this weekend.
Yeah. And already we are learning that Patel has ordered over 1,000 FBI agents to be relocated all across the country, and cuts are expected there as well. Meanwhile, at the White House, during a meeting with a bunch of governors, things got pretty heated when President Trump and Maine's governor had this confrontation over the transgender women in sports ban he signed a few weeks back.
The NCAA has complied immediately, by the way. That's good. But I understand Maine. Is Maine here, the governor of Maine? Well, are you not going to comply with it?
I'm complying with state and federal laws.
We are the federal law. Well, you better do it. You better do it because you're not going to get any federal funding at all if you don't. And by the way, your population, even though it's somewhat liberal, although I did very well there, your population doesn't want men playing in women's sports. So you better comply, because otherwise you're not getting any federal funding.
See you in court.
Every state, good, I'll see you in court. I look forward to that. That should be a real easy one.
And NBC's Garrett Haake joins us now from the White House. Garrett, I mean, President Trump responding to the governor there saying, quote, "We are the federal law." Like, just refresh our memory here. Do executive orders have the same power as law? And what is the difference between legislative law and executive power here?
No, the short answer is no, they don't have the same force as law. It's why that a president can come in and essentially undo much of the work of his predecessor with the stroke of a pen. We saw Joe Biden do it at the end of the first Trump term. President Trump has been doing it now at the end of Joe Biden's term. But executive orders can give teeth to something like what we have here in this case with Maine, where shortly after that exchange with the governor, the Department of Education opened a Title IX investigation into what Maine is doing vis-a-vis that transgender athlete EO. They want to investigate it. When there's a conflict between a law and an EO, the law will always win. But when you're operating in a space in which Congress hasn't acted, sometimes courts will take a look at an EO and say, this is the only guidance we have, we're going to go with it. We might find ourselves in that kind of situation in Maine. It'll be an interesting test case.
Meanwhile, we also saw Trump talking about poll numbers and saying that he had the highest poll numbers ever and that people were very supportive of what he was doing. What are the polls actually showing right now?
Well, if he has the highest poll numbers ever, there are private polls that he's not sharing. We ran into this a lot during the campaign, Gadi, where Donald Trump would talk about poll numbers that either didn't exist or were the most favorable of a buffet of options that might be presented by publicly available poll data. What we have seen recently from CNN and from the Washington Post is that the president's underwater in terms of his overall popularity and in the popularity of most of the individual issues, things like his handling of the federal government, his handling of the economy, really the key issue during the campaign. The only one where he's still net positive is on his handling of immigration, where I think you could argue if you voted for Trump on immigration, you're very much getting what you voted for. But we are starting to see this backlash, and it's come up from people who've been fired and who are speaking out, and from some of these congressional town halls where folks are saying this might be going too far, too fast. Take a listen to some of what we heard at a town hall in a very red district in Georgia last night.
I want to say that from a conservative perspective, the approach of DOJ is completely 180 degrees. They've been indiscriminate, and they've taken a chainsaw to these things.
I understand trying to do more with less. That's reasonable. What's not reasonable is taking this chainsaw approach. Why is this being jammed down the pipe so rushed and sloppily?
Gadi, what I don't know yet are whether these protests and these sort of outspoken constituents at town halls are more like what we saw in 2017, all the protests around health care that ultimately were kind of the tip of the iceberg, the Democrats retaking the House in 2018, or if this is more the most vocal activists kind of looking for their first chance to speak out. Only time's going to tell.
And Garrett, today we also saw Kash Patel sworn in and immediately order 1,000 FBI agents out of headquarters, out into the field to go do policing. What are we about to see at the Hoover building?
Yeah, I think this is going to be really interesting, Gadi. I think two things. First, this serves the purpose that Kash Patel says it serves, at least to a certain extent, which is to get the FBI more focused on police work and less focused on the kind of internal politics that have become such a rallying cry for Republicans. The idea of a deep state based in the Hoover building is orthodoxy now among a certain subset of Republican voters. That can't exist if those people aren't there. So I think you see a little bit of that. I think there's also another effort here to get people out of the system who you might not otherwise want to fire. So we've seen this widespread effort across the government to fire government employees, to get people to take buyouts. Here's another tool in the kit of people who want to disassemble the federal government. If you can't fire someone, you could transfer them to somewhere they don't want to go and see if they decide on their own that maybe this job just isn't for them anymore.
Interesting. Garrett Haake, thanks so much.
You bet.
And tonight, the Trump administration continues to slash jobs across the federal workforce, gaining even more momentum after a federal judge ruled against labor groups trying to stop some of the layoffs at USAID. And as tax season approaches, we are being told at least 250 IRS workers were fired in Philly yesterday and at least another 100 in Kansas City. We're seeing reports that the IRS plans to lay off thousands more employees very soon. But so far, the administration has not been giving specifics. Joining us now is Jonathan Curry. He was one of the people that was fired from the IRS this week. Jonathan, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us tonight. Again, we're having a little bit of difficulty getting those specifics, but in your case, how were you let go?
Yeah, so I started at the IRS about a year ago. I started March 11th, 2024, and so I was about 3 weeks shy of my 1 year mark, which means I was still in probation. The way I was fired kind of happened in stages for me. I found out, I really knew the writing was on the wall about a week ago when initially they were going to do targeted layoffs of probationary employees. And then last Thursday, they announced they were just going to do indiscriminate, widespread, just cutting people across the board. And at that point, I knew I was probably going to be the end of things there. That weekend, it's President's Day weekend, I was looking at my phone, checking it every hour, looking to see if I got notice, and I was kind of left in limbo. I show up to work on Tuesday, still nothing, checking my manager, they haven't heard anything, and then finally on Wednesday, I had a brief call with my manager, and it was a tough call for her. And she just basically told me, "I'm so sorry to tell you, but I'm going to need you to come into the office tomorrow. I'm going to need you to bring your laptop, your work phone, your government expense card, anything that belongs to the IRS because you're being let go." And that's what happened. The next day I came in and it was tough. My initial reaction to that was bitterness, I'll be honest. I was upset at a lot of the people I know, people on social media who I would see cheering on what's going on and saying, not just, say like they want to see the government downsized, but they was saying like, oh, look at those government workers, they're getting what was coming to them. And I just thought that was just not at all the reality. There were so many people that I worked with there that were really sharp workers. And it was tough to see. But I knew that being bitter hurts me more than it hurts them. And so it was time to turn the page. The other part of it, too, it was very disorienting. I have a wife, I have 3 kids, I have a 4th on the way. Mortgage to pay, and we're a single income family. So we're going from, my full salary to nothing all of a sudden. And that's a hard thing to take on all at once. It was a challenging time for sure.
And in terms of, is there a severance that they've offered, or how does it work? How long are you going to be paid, or have they just cut it off completely?
My understanding is I'm paid up to the day until the day I was laid off. So no severance from me. For those that took the buyout, there was the famous fork in the road email that went out. And for those that took that, I believe they would still be eligible for that, assuming that everything works out there. The IRS is a bit of an unusual case in that a lot of the IRS personnel who did take the buyout were considered mission critical for the filing season. And so even for those that did take the buyout, they still have to work through May. But for myself, because I didn't take the offer, which was sort of, you had about a week to decide if you were going to take it or not, it was, I missed my chance there.
Well, talking about mission critical and talking about what's actually happening in the IRS right now, to the outside world, what happens in those walls is like this, mysterious bureaucracy that most people aren't privy to, but we know our taxes go to. But what's happening right now inside of the IRS as we enter tax season?
I'll add, I'll plug, that's why it's probably not a good idea to cut your communications team, because they're the ones that share what goes on inside the IRS. We're the ones that, arrange interviews between top officials and the public. We write press releases. We tell people, what new tax scams are out there, and, what new features are in the IRS online account that'll help in this filing season. So there's, the cuts were across the board in a lot of different areas. I don't know that this filing season you're going to see a big change, but the IRS had been understaffed for a long time. And about the last decade, the 2010s, they were undermanned, understaffed, and there were cracks that were really starting to show. And then when the pandemic hit, it just blew those cracks wide open, and a lot of operations really suffered, and the taxpayers are the ones that suffered. During the pandemic, if you owe taxes and you mailed in a check to pay it, but no one was there to process it, or if they were behind in processing, you would get a notice saying, hey, sorry, when are you going to pay up? And then you'd be starting this cascading effect of trying to chase down what's going on, making more phone calls, and just getting, worse and worse. So cutting, we're going to be losing customer service representatives. We're going to be losing, communications personnel like myself. A lot of people, too. I know it might not be fun to talk about it, but, there's the revenue collection side of it, the revenue agents, the revenue officers as well. And, of course, in a perfect world, everybody would pay their taxes, and if you ask nicely. But you do need to have a carrot and stick approach. And when you hamstring the stick side of it, you really do undermine the tax system as a whole.
Yeah, another place where we will see confusion around the corner. Jonathan Curry, really sorry about what's happened, but thank you so much for sharing your story with us.
Thank you for having me on.
Sure. And here are some other stories that we're watching tonight. The man who attacked author Salman Rushdie has been found guilty of attempted murder. That was a brutal stabbing back in August of 2022. Rushdie was stabbed over a dozen times, and he is now partially blind from that attack. The attacker faces up to 25 years in prison. 3 people have been shot and killed outside of Louisville, DMV today. Now, Kentucky's governor is calling it a senseless act of violence. Police seem to have very little to go on still right now, and they are looking for the shooter as we speak. And one of Diddy's lawyers is calling it quits. Just months ahead of his sex trafficking case in New York, Anthony Rico filed a motion yesterday to basically step down as counsel. He didn't give an explanation, but the move should not impact the trial set for May, as Combs has 5 other lawyers on his team. And Canada beat Team USA to claim hockey's first 4 nations face-off title. An overtime goal sealed the win, but at times it seemed like more than a game with all the recent tensions between the two countries. Here's what Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said to President Trump after the win. You can't take our country, and you can't take our game. And New York Yankees are now free to grow well-groomed beards by finally getting rid of a strict 49-year-old facial hair policy, which started as a way to look more professional and less of a hippie, but then turned into an overreach by the bosses. But now they say the policy is basically outdated and unreasonable. So we'll likely never get a transformation like the one we got in 2006 when Johnny Damon left the Red Sox to play with the Yankees. And breaking news tonight, President Trump fired the most senior military officer in the United States, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Charles C.Q. Brown. Brown is a four-star general and a former fighter pilot. He is also the second African-American to hold the chairman's job. Trump immediately nominated Air Force Lieutenant General Dan Raisin Kane on Truth Social to take the former chairman's position. Joint Chiefs chairmen usually stay in place as administrations change, regardless of the president's political party. And don't go anywhere. We are just getting started. Up next, if President Trump takes over the Postal Service, what does that mean for mail? We are going to take a closer look. Plus, Los Angeles' mayor just fired the fire chief over her response to the horrific fires we saw here last month. That's all coming up ahead, so stay tuned. Hey, welcome back. It looks like the Trump administration is planning to basically take over the United States Postal Service. And if you're like, isn't the Postal Service already a federal thing? Yes, it is. But it's currently under the Postmaster General and this 11-person board of governors that serve 7-year terms. And more than half of the current board was appointed by Trump in his first term. But here's what the president is calling for today.
We want to have a post office that works well and doesn't lose massive amounts of money. And we're thinking about doing that, and it'll be a form of a merger, but it'll remain the Postal Service, and I think it'll operate a lot better than it has been over the years. It's been just a tremendous loser for this country.
And both the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal reported the White House is preparing an executive order that would fire USPS's Board of Governors and move control of the Postal Service under the Department of Commerce. The White House tells NBC News there are no planned executive orders, but we just heard the president say that they're thinking about a merger. And we've also learned all the current USPS Board of Governors have hired lawyers. Joining me now is Rick Geddes, founder and founding director of the Cornell Program in Infrastructure Policy. Rick, thanks so much for being with us. First off, to hear the president just now describe it, he's making it sound like this big failure. Given its size and what it does every day, is his description accurate?
I guess, Gadi, first, thanks for having me on. I guess it depends on how you measure success or failure. The Postal Service has something called the Universal Service Obligation, which is interpreted as delivering to basically every address in the United States 6 days a week. We kind of call that the last mile of delivery. It does that very well. It has an extensive sorting system and network of delivery trucks and people who walk the routes to make that happen. If you've measured in sort of a fiscal sense, the Postal Service has had a lot of trouble. Its fiscal year, which ended September in 2024, it lost about $9.5 billion, I believe, and it's projected to lose about $7 billion in this current fiscal year. So the Postal Service is clearly facing problem. As we all know, things have gone digital. So the demand for physical document delivery, which is the bread and butter of the Postal Service, has been declining. First-class mail has been declining since 2001. So that's really cut into the Postal Service's finances.
I mean, so $9 billion the year before, $7 billion last year. Is it supposed to turn a profit, or is it supposed to let us mail things without, like, charging us an arm and a leg?
Yeah, Gadi, that's a great question. Viewers who are old enough might remember that it used to be the post office. It was called the post office. And in the 1960s, that became very inefficient. It was viewed as politically controlled. So in 1970, Congress created the modern United States Postal Service in the Postal Reorganization Act. And in that act, the Postal Service was supposed to cover all its costs by the revenues that it brings in by charging rates and fees for mail. So it's supposed to break even, maybe not every year, but basically break even over time. But Gadi, in recent years, things have just become more difficult for the Postal Service because the costs of maintaining that universal service network are high and pretty fixed. But if you're looking at the revenue, particularly in the most profitable mail classes like first class, declining, you have kind of a tough fiscal situation for the Postal Service.
Yeah, I mean, as you were saying, like email, we've got the internet, we've got DocuSign, plus we've got massive innovation in the delivery routes from Amazon and FedEx. Is there ever a future where the Postal Service could break even? And does the Postal Service actually need an entire overhaul here?
Yeah, I think it needs change. Gadi, I don't know entire overhaul, but I think things that other countries have done, like reduce, does it have to go and deliver 6 days per week? Could it cut it back? Tuesdays is actually the lightest mail day of the week. Perhaps it could cut out Tuesdays. A lot of other countries don't deliver on Saturdays. That would save it some money. Maybe it can reduce the speed of delivery for certain mail classes. That would save it money. But I think that we do need to take a fundamental look at it. I think a lot of other countries have freed up their postal monopolies, which allows the Postal Service to get less regulation, but also to face more competition. And usually in that trade-off, it becomes more business-like. So I think that would be a good thing for the Postal Service.
Yeah, we'll see what happens next. Rick, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thanks for having me on.
Sure. Coming up, could the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas be in jeopardy? We've got a report from Tel Aviv. But first, you got to see this. Brazilian media reports that a flight was taken off from Rio de Janeiro to Sao Paulo when it hit a flock of birds, completely smashing the nose of the plane. Thankfully, no one was hurt, and the flight turned back for an emergency landing. Hey, welcome back. And new tensions between Israel and Hamas after Hamas said today it had handed over the wrong body of an Israeli hostage. But despite the rising tensions, there seem to be no indications that tomorrow's release of 6 Israeli hostages could be in jeopardy. NBC's international correspondent Hala Garani tells us more.
Israeli authorities have said that the 2 Bibas children were not killed in an Israeli airstrike, and they say the results of forensic examinations have revealed that they were not shot either. Daniel Hagari, the spokesperson for the Israeli military, saying that the 2 children were killed with bare hands. This is according to a statement he made earlier today. The prime minister of this country, Benjamin Netanyahu, has vowed, quote, revenge for Hamas, sending among the bodies of 4 deceased hostages 1 coffin containing the remains of another woman other than Cherie Bibas that they said they were sending back with her 2 children, Kafir and Ariel. The bodies of the other 3 deceased hostages, the 2 Bibas children, as well as Oded Lifshitz, who was in his mid-80s, have been formally identified as belonging to them. The funeral for Oded Lifshitz will take place next Tuesday. Now, this is all happening a day before Israel is getting ready to receive 6 living hostages. There are 4 who were taken captive on October 7th, 2 others who'd been detained for several years inside of Gaza. Those men will be released as well. The big question, of course, now is what about phase 2? Negotiations to enter that second phase started late, but there is some optimism perhaps that phase 2 will take place despite all of these setbacks and despite some of these pronouncements from the Israeli prime minister that he intends on seeking revenge. Donald Trump, the U.S. president's Middle East envoy, has expressed some optimism that the 2 sides can get to that phase. And finally, security forces and police here are still trying to figure out who placed explosive devices on empty buses in an empty bus depot yesterday in a Tel Aviv suburb. 3 of them went off. Another was defused and found in time. The question, though, still remains. There have been some arrests made, but quite unclear who placed these devices and why.
Hala Garani, thank you so much. And just in the last few hours, it looks like negotiations between the U.S. and Ukraine might be turning a corner after a very tense week. Now, President Trump saying now the U.S. is getting closer to reaching a deal on minerals in exchange for aid to Ukraine, and that would essentially grant the U.S. access to the country's rare natural resources. Now, all of that coming after a very different tone this morning when President Trump seemed to belittle Ukraine's standing.
I've had very good talks with Putin, and I've had not such good talks with Ukraine. They don't have any cards, but they play it tough. But we're not going to let this continue. This war is terrible. It would have never happened if I were president, but it did happen, so I got stuck with it, and the whole world is stuck with it.
NBC's Richard Engel is on the ground in Kharkiv with the very latest.
I'm now on the outskirts of the eastern Ukrainian city of Kharkiv, and these are Russian armored vehicles destroyed by Ukrainian forces as the Russians tried to capture this city. And they are kept here in this field on the edge of the city as a reminder to Ukrainians that the threat remains, that the Russians are still close by and could return at any time. And Ukrainians now find themselves at a very dangerous crossroads. Do they accept President Trump's demand that Ukraine hand over large amounts of natural resources, specifically 50% of this country's rare earth mineral rights, in exchange for security? Or do they reject the deal and potentially face the Russians on their own without American support? Not an easy position to be in, and Ukrainian troops that I've been speaking to feel that President Trump is using his leverage, pressuring them, squeezing them, forcing them to do some sort of deal. But a soldier I spoke to not long ago said, considering the position that Ukraine is actually in, it's probably worth signing the deal, because if they don't do the deal, then the Russians could return, could take over this country, and then Ukraine loses its minerals and its freedom. And it does seem like President Zelensky might be heading in that direction. He said in one of his nightly addresses that initially he'd rejected the deal outright, provoking President Trump's ire, provoking President Trump to insult him, falsely claim that he's a dictator. But in his nightly address, now President Zelensky says that security guarantees and economic deals always go hand in hand. So he's leaning more in the direction, it seems, to accepting the offer. Richard Engel, NBC News, outside of Kharkiv, Ukraine.
Richard, thank you. And here's some other stories that are happening around the world right now. An Argentina court has dropped charges for 3 of the 5 people accused in the death of singer Liam Payne. Now, those are 2 hotel workers where Payne died and a friend acting as Payne's manager. But the 2 others, they were ordered to stay in pretrial detention. Both are accused of giving Payne cocaine during his stay in Buenos Aires. They face up to 15 years in prison. And today, a knife attack in the Holocaust Memorial in Berlin triggered a manhunt. 1 person was hurt. The attacker still hasn't been found, and it comes as Germany is getting ready for a big parliament election this weekend. While the party of the former Chancellor Angela Merkel is ahead in the polls, the far-right Alternative for Germany party is polling right behind in 2nd place. And in Sri Lanka, a train hit an elephant herd near a wildlife sanctuary. 6 elephants were killed, including 4 little babies. Officials say none of the passengers in the train were hurt. And this morning, commercial flights were diverted between Australia and New Zealand because the Chinese Navy started some live-fire military drills. They were pretty far away from China's coast, but in international waters, which is legal. Those drills sparking concern from both Australia and New Zealand, with government officials calling them unusual. And up next, LA's fire chief is out of a job tonight after those devastating fires ripped through Southern California last month. The details are coming up next, so stay tuned. And now to the political fallout from those devastating wildfires that took place here in L.A. last month. Today, Mayor Karen Bass announcing that she fired L.A. Fire Chief Kristen Crowley specifically for her response to the Palisades wildfire. Here's what she had to say about her decision.
We all know that 1,000 firefighters that could have been on duty on the morning the fires broke were instead sent home on Chief Crowley's watch. These actions required her removal.
Bass also said that Crowley refused to do an after-action report on the fires, which also led to her removal. And this all comes as tensions between the two have been boiling since the fire started. Last month, you might remember, Crowley was asked if the city had failed the fire department. This is what she said at the time.
Did they fail you? Yes. What I can tell you is we are still understaffed, we're still under-resourced, and we're still underfunded. So with that, whether it's $7 million, $10 million.
But was the budget cut?
Yes, it was cut, and it did impact our ability to provide service.
The mayor says Crowley's removal is effective immediately. Joining us now is NBC News correspondent David Noriega. David, I mean, this is a pretty high-stakes blame game that has been kind of playing out over the last month. I remember like a little while ago, people were chasing the mayor down in the hallway of City Hall because it seemed like she was about to fire the fire chief. And then a month goes by, and now we're seeing this. Why did it take so long to come to a head here?
Yeah, look, this has been happening since the first few days after these fires started, when now former Chief Crowley started speaking to the media, gave a number of interviews in which she pretty openly criticized the city. As you just heard, that's only one example of several interviews that she gave, where she criticized the city for basically underfunding the fire department. She specifically blamed budget cuts under Mayor Karen Bass for those problems. Karen Bass has disputed those assertions. She says that the budget cuts that the budgets that she's overseen did not meaningfully affect fire department operations. Now, then there's the back and forth that you described there in your intro, or the claims rather that the mayor is making about why she had to fire Crowley. There's the 1,000 or so personnel that she did not, according to the mayor, position to supplement existing forces on the morning of the fire, and there is the filing of the after-action report. But there's another factor here, which is a little bit more kind of goes to the tension between these two officials, which is the fact that Mayor Karen Bass has blamed the former chief, Crowley, for the fact that she was not present in LA when the fires broke out. She was pretty notoriously on a trip abroad. She was in Ghana and Africa, and was criticized very heavily for not being present when this, as we now recognize it, historical natural disaster took place. She said that the fire chief did not call her and warn her of the dangers ahead. Of course, you and I both live here. We know that this wind event was forecasted. We knew that there was going to be extreme fire risk, and the fire department has pointed that out as well. But that is one of the sort of background issues here. Now that Crowley is gone, it'll be very interesting to see whether she's willing to continue speaking to the press and tell her side of the story.
It's also going to be interesting to see what the public sentiment is here in Los Angeles. You live here, I live here. Do you think that this is going to lessen a lot of the heat that Mayor Bass has been getting day after day after day?
Doubtful. I think Mayor Bass is embattled, to put it mildly. I think the fact that she wasn't here when the fire started, the fact that she received this very pointed criticism from the fire chief, those all factor into that. Mayor Bass removing Crowley from her position does not necessarily undo the things that happened in the past, right? And again, it actually, in some ways, empowers Crowley to speak even more freely than she was already speaking. And, you know, it depends. Look, for example, the LAFD, the LA Fire Department, put out a statement today. We haven't actually heard from Crowley, but we heard from the fire department. They put out a statement saying that in response to the mayor having blamed former Chief Crowley for her being absent, for not having called her and warned her of the danger of the fires, they said, we gave multiple media interviews, we did a couple of media advisories, and we notified city officials of the fire risk. So the official media outlet of the fire department is sort of subtly or tacitly pushing back on the mayor's claim. So this is not just between the mayor and now former chief. This is between the mayor and the fire department to a certain extent, and the fire chief was not the only person to criticize the mayor for what's been happening since the fire.
And that's the subtle pushback. We'll stay tuned for what happens next. David Noriega, thank you. And here's some of the stories that are happening out west that we're following tonight. Texas is now reporting at least 90 cases of measles. Now, the virus is spreading quickly in the northwest part of the state with over 30 new cases just this week. Now, the Texas Health Department says it's mostly spreading among people who aren't vaccinated against the measles. And LA Dodgers pitcher Bobby Miller was hit on the head in last night's spring training game against the Cubs. He was hit by a comebacker right back to the mound, going more than 105 miles per hour. Miller posted on social media that he's doing okay, but he's under concussion protocol for the next few days. And Arizona state lawmakers advanced a bill that will block the use of AI in reviewing medical claims. That means people, not AI, we're going to be the ones that have the ability to deny medical claims. The bill passed on the House floor with a unanimous vote. It now heads to the Senate, and if it passes there, it'll be on the governor's desk soon. Before we go, it's time for the future of everything. So what does a slice of American cheese have to do with AI and copyright laws? This is not the setup to a joke. We're going to explain. It is very important, so stay tuned. welcome back. Let's start with some Future of Everything headlines. And the U.S. Space Force just released this picture. It's the first picture ever taken from X-37B, a top-secret space plane. Now, previous missions were in low orbit, but that photo seems to show the plane way further from Earth. A plane was launched by SpaceX in 2023, and its true mission is still classified. And is it a robot or, I don't know, something from Westworld? Meet Proto-Clone, a humanoid robot made by Clone Robotics. It's got artificial muscles that look just like real human anatomy. If it's very, very twitchy, just missing a face. Something to dream about tonight, I guess. And remember that asteroid that had a little bit more than a 3% chance of hitting Earth? Well, NASA has recalculated. It's dropped those odds to 0.28%, so we can all breathe a sigh of relief. But it is still a big wake-up call for space agencies around the world to start thinking about how to defend our planet from any other potential threats in outer space. And it looks like China is stepping up, forming its own planetary defense force. NBC's Janice Mackey-Frayer has more.
With an asteroid on course to conceivably hit the Earth, China seems to be taking no chances. It's putting together what it's calling a planetary defense force that could presumably help humanity prepare for whatever the universe throws at them. Like 2024 YR4.
The most likely outcome is that it will not hit, and so nobody's panicking yet.
NASA now says there's less than a 1% chance the asteroid might strike in 2032. That's down from 3.1%, but it keeps changing almost every day as scientists get more data on its shape, speed, and path. The probability sounds small, but the asteroid is not. At an estimated 130 to 300 feet across, it's about the size of the Statue of Liberty. That's a lot of rock. So here in China, when the government posted ads recently on social media to recruit what they call planetary defense specialists, it piqued interest. They say international cooperation and research will be a big focus for the new force. But so far, they're hiring 3 people. Top scientific qualifications and skills are a must, it says, as well as firm political support of the Chinese Communist Party and close alignment with President Xi Jinping's ideology. Chinese social media has had a lot to say about it. One user declared, "You're the chosen ones," while another said, "The fate of the Earth rests on you 3. No pressure." Experts tracking China's space program think the job ads dropping at the same time as the warnings about 2024 YR4 is largely coincidental. Authorities here have been investing heavily in space exploration and aerospace development.
This is just maybe one area where they want to demonstrate from a national pride standpoint and prestige that they are as good as the United States.
Having already been to the far side of the moon, China is now setting sights on asteroids. In 2027, China will try an asteroid diversion, like what NASA did in 2022 by crashing its DART spacecraft into an asteroid to knock it off course. That was a first for humans. As for 2024 YR4, it's been called the riskiest space rock ever detected. Less than 7 years away now, and safe to say the world is watching. Janice Mackey-Frayer, NBC News, Beijing.
A little rock like that, bringing the whole world together. Good stuff. Janice Mackey-Frayer, thank you. And finally tonight, the future of art and AI. There are legitimate debates about originality and ownership when it comes to this kind of digital artistic expression. But in this era of endless online content, one piece will go down in history, and it started with a prompt and a slice of American cheese. Take a look.
Van Gogh might have predicted it centuries ago. Painters of the future, colorists in ways we've never seen.
It's this understanding of composition, of shadow and light and how those interplay. That craft is still extremely valuable.
An evolution that's still shaped by what humans see.
That's something kind of inspired this idea for putting a single piece of American cheese on top of this abstract, surreal woman. But I also kind of wanted to go into the realm of absurdity, and so I brought spaghetti into it.
Call it human creativity supercharged by AI with a dose of storytelling, too.
I wanted something that was really going to evoke this sense of broken apart and pulled back together. Working with AI is very much like working with a dance partner. You have to understand how it's going to interpret what you're giving it.
Fractured glass, faces in the facets, prompts that become brushstrokes, and AI does the rest.
You can guide both through color and structure and your words to really help the model understand what you're trying to get. What it's doing is it's transforming what I created based on that prompt and based on other inputs into that resulting image.
But is this really art, or is it something totally different?
Here's what I think about AI art. I hate it.
There is no way an AI bro can make art that surpasses this mewing onion.
When it's as easy as it is, the sheer volume floods existing art markets that previously belonged to people who have spent their lives establishing themselves as working artists.
I'm hopeful that we will reevaluate our relationship with the technology, and rather than having this very black and white conversation of is it good or is it bad, really ask more thoughtful questions about how we build this technology.
As for a single piece of American cheese, it's now legally certified as original work, the first of its kind. The creative process, key to landing the stamp of approval.
We're able to finally convince the Copyright Office that this is human creativity and that it merits a copyright. And that, for me, has definitely been validating. The work that people create with AI, when it is really part of a thoughtful and deliberate exercise, is an expression.
AI and cheese, a little bit of cheesy. That's going to do it for us tonight. I'm Gadi Schwartz. We'll see you on Monday. But until then, stay tuned now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.